It was supposed to be a routine patrol through the silent, snow-covered forest, nothing more than a quick sweep before sunrise. But Officer Ryan Hale froze mid-step when he heard it, a faint, trembling whimper drifting between the frozen trees. At first, he thought it was just one injured animal, but as he followed the sound deeper into the woods, the fog thickened, and the whimpers multiplied. Then he saw them, 15 German shepherds, police dogs, tied tightly around tree trunks, shivering violently, their eyes wide with terror, and all of them staring straight at him, as if they had been waiting for him to arrive. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. These weren't strays. These were trained K-9 officers, abandoned deliberately. And the way they looked at him, it felt less like fear and more like a warning. Who would do this? Why were elite police dogs left out here to die? And what Ryan uncovered next changed everything. Stay with us. This unbelievable true-style story will leave you stunned. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The forest was quieter than usual that morning, the kind of silence that felt too heavy to be natural. Officer Ryan Hale stepped out of his patrol truck, his boots sinking into the fresh blanket of snow. A thin layer of frost clung to the branches overhead, and each breath he exhaled faded into the cold air almost instantly. Winter patrols were normally calm. No noise, no movement, nothing but the distant hum of wind brushing through the trees. But today, something felt different. Ryan didn't know what it was yet, but his instincts were already waking up, sharpening like they always did before something serious. He adjusted his radio, checked the safety on his holster, and slowly scanned the area. Snowstorms had passed overnight, leaving behind a maze of untouched white ground. Usually he'd see tracks from deer or foxes, maybe the occasional hiker's prints from the day before. But today the snow looked disturbed. Not by animals, these were human footprints. Several sets of them, and they were fresh. Ryan crouched down, brushing aside the snow with his gloved hand. The prints were close together, too close for normal walking. Whoever had passed through here moved quickly, almost in a hurry. His brows knit together. It didn't make sense. No one should be this deep into the woods, especially in temperatures this dangerous. He rose to his feet and walked slowly, studying every step. The forest grew denser ahead, tall pines standing like silent guards. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard something, a faint sound, too soft to identify. He paused, listening carefully. Nothing. Only silence again. Yet the uneasy feeling didn't leave him. If anything, it grew stronger. He reached the edge of a narrow trail where the footprints suddenly scattered, as if whoever made them had split apart or panicked. Ryan frowned. Trails like this didn't normally attract more than one or two wanderers. He followed the footprints another few yards, his senses on full alert. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a small, sharp sound, almost like a whimper. Ryan stopped. His breath hitched. That wasn't the sound of a wild animal. It was too controlled, too intentional, too desperate. He turned slowly toward the direction it came from, staring into the thick wall of trees where visibility faded into gray. A second sound followed, slightly louder, a weak, muffled cry carried by the wind. Ryan's heartbeat quickened. Whoever, or whatever, made that sound needed help. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip on his flashlight, and stepped off the trail. Something was waiting for him in the frozen woods. The deeper Ryan walked into the forest, the stronger the strange sounds became. They weren't loud, but they were steady, short, weak cries carried by the cold wind. His boots crunched through the snow as he followed the faint trail of noise, each step pulling him further into the shadows. The trees grew taller and closer together, blocking most of the daylight. As he pushed through a cluster of branches, he suddenly stopped. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something was ahead, something that didn't belong in the middle of a frozen forest. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Between two tall pines, he saw shapes, dark shapes, lined up in a strange formation. He blinked, wiped the frost from his eyelashes, and stepped forward. His breath caught instantly. They were dogs, German shepherds, not wandering strays, not wild rescues, fully trained police dogs. Their collars, their posture, their builds, everything about them screamed K9 unit. But instead of standing tall and strong, they were tied tightly to the trees with thick ropes wrapped around their bodies and legs. There weren't just one or two dogs. There were 15. Ryan froze, unable to process what he was seeing. The dogs stared at him with wide, fearful eyes. Some whimpered softly. Others pressed their paws helplessly against the ropes. Snow clung to their fur, their breath trembling in the bitter cold. These were working dogs, highly trained and disciplined, dogs who weren't supposed to panic. Yet every single one of them looked terrified. He stepped closer, his pulse racing. "Hey, hey, boy," he whispered, reaching out slowly. One of the dogs, a large shepherd with sharp, intelligent eyes, lifted its head as far as the ropes allowed. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. Instead, it stared at Ryan with a look so desperate it sent a chill deeper than the winter air through his spine. The ropes weren't old. They hadn't been exposed to the weather for long. Whoever tied these dogs had done it recently. Very recently. Ryan scanned the ground. More human footprints circled the area. Some prints looked deep, as if someone had been rushing. Others were smeared, like someone dragged their feet. Something terrible happened here, and it had happened fast. Ryan's throat tightened. Questions flooded his mind, but one rose above all the others. Who would abandon 15 trained police dogs in the middle of a frozen forest? Before he could think further, one of the dogs let out a sharp, urgent cry. It wasn't fear, it was a warning. Ryan felt that urgent cry pierce straight through the icy air. It wasn't random. It wasn't fear. It was intentional, directed at him. He stepped closer, watching the dog's reactions closely. Their ears perked. Their eyes followed his every movement. The large shepherd with the sharp eyes, clearly the leader, shifted its weight, trying once again to pull against the ropes. Its paws scraped the snow, leaving shallow marks in the frozen ground. Ryan's breathing slowed as he crouched beside it, trying not to startle the others. "Easy. I'm here to help," he whispered. The leader didn't blink. It held his gaze as if trying to speak without words. When Ryan moved his hands slowly toward the rope, the dog didn't pull away. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling sound. Neither a growl nor a whine. Something in between. A warning? A direction? Ryan hesitated, then stood up and stepped back. Immediately, the dog barked sharply once. The others followed with low, restless whines. It was as if they wanted him to pay attention to something else. Something he hadn't noticed yet. Ryan scanned the trees around them. Snow continued to drift softly from the branches, covering older tracks but leaving newer ones exposed. Then he saw it. 3 distinct paw marks leading away from the group, half erased by wind. Someone had untied a dog, or a dog had escaped. But where was it now? And why had the others been left behind? The leader barked again, twice this time, quick and desperate. Ryan turned toward it, and the dog shifted its gaze sharply to the right. Ryan followed the direction with his eyes. Beneath a low-hanging pine, the snow looked disturbed, like something had been dragged or pushed recently. His stomach tightened. Someone had moved through here, human or animal, only minutes ago. Ryan stepped toward the disturbed snow, but the moment he did, all 15 dogs reacted at once. Their bodies stiffened, their ears shot forward. Several barked loudly, their voices echoing through the forest. Others whined anxiously, tugging against the ropes with renewed panic. Ryan stopped instantly. Their message was clear. Do not go there. The leader's eyes locked onto his again, filled with an intensity Ryan had never seen in a dog before. It wasn't asking for rescue. It wasn't asking for freedom. It was asking him to listen. Something dangerous was waiting beyond the trees, something the dogs had witnessed, something they desperately wanted him to avoid. Ryan's heartbeat quickened as he slowly backed up. Whatever was out there, it wasn't finished. Ryan's pulse hammered as the chorus of barks echoed through the frozen forest. The dogs weren't just scared, they were alerting him, warning him, begging him not to take another step toward the disturbed snow. He swallowed hard and reached for his radio, his gloved fingers stiff from the cold. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hale," he said steadily. "I've located multiple K-9 units tied up in the eastern woods. Repeat, 15 police dogs, restrained and abandoned. I need immediate backup and medical support." Static. A long, brittle stretch of static. Ryan frowned and pressed the button again, adjusting the antenna. "Dispatch, copy that? I need an urgent response." His voice echoed slightly between the trees, but the radio gave nothing back. No crackle, no voice, just silence. He checked the battery, full, signal indicator, strong enough. There was no reason he shouldn't be able to connect, unless something was blocking the frequency. His uneasiness deepened. The forest suddenly felt tighter, smaller, as if the trees themselves were listening. Ryan stepped back toward the dogs, hoping the elevation change might help the signal. But the moment he lifted the radio again, the leader dog barked sharply, once, then twice, its body stiffening. It didn't want him to move away. "Easy, boy," Ryan murmured, lowering the radio slightly. The other dogs whined anxiously, tugging against the ropes again, their breath rising like clouds in the freezing air. These weren't random reactions. They were synchronized, instinctive. Something in the woods had them terrified, and they didn't want him wandering off alone. He glanced around, scanning the tree line. No movement, no shadows, no sound except the dog's frantic breathing. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an invisible weight settling on his shoulders. He tried the radio once more. "Any unit in range, come in. I have an active emergency." Nothing. He lowered the device, frustration tightening his chest. Backup wasn't coming, not now, not soon, and that meant he was alone with 15 distressed K-9s and a forest hiding something dangerous. Ryan took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Fear clouded judgment, and judgment kept officers alive. He turned back to the dogs, focusing on the leader. "Okay," he whispered, "show me what I'm missing." The leader's ears twitched. Its gaze shifted again, not toward the disturbed snow this time, but deeper into the woods where the shadows thickened into near darkness. Ryan followed its stare. Something or someone was out there. And the dogs knew exactly who. Ryan steadied his breathing, eyes fixed on the direction the leader dog kept signaling toward. The forest there was darker, almost unnaturally so, the dense pines swallowing what little daylight remained. Ryan took a cautious step forward, crunching the snow beneath his boots. As he did, something caught his eye. Lines in the snow, faint but unmistakable. Footprints. He crouched down, brushing away the fresh layer of powder. The tracks were human, deep, uneven, left in a hurry. But what chilled Ryan wasn't the shape of the prints. It was the quantity. Not one person, not two. At least 3, maybe 4 individuals had moved through this exact path. He lifted his head and scanned the forest ahead. The footprints didn't follow a neat pattern. They zigzagged, crossed over each other, broke off, then reappeared. Someone was deliberately trying to conceal their direction. Ryan frowned. Experienced hunters would know how to mask a trail. Criminals with outdoor training would too. Whoever led these dogs into the woods wasn't careless. They knew exactly what they were doing. Ryan rose slowly, brushing the snow off his knee. The dogs behind him whined louder, sensing his focus shift. The leader tugged at his ropes again, barking sharply as if telling Ryan not to follow the tracks. But he had to. The footprints were fresh, maybe no more than an hour old. There was a chance the people responsible were still nearby. He stepped forward along the trail. Each movement felt heavier than the last. The deeper he went, the more the air changed. It wasn't just colder, it was stiller. Even the wind seemed to avoid this part of the forest. Ryan paused when he reached a thick patch of snow where the footprints abruptly changed. Instead of walking, the marks suggested dragging. Something, or someone, had been pulled along the ground. His chest tightened. He knelt again, tracing the lines with a gloved fingertip. The drag marks extended several yards before stopping near a cluster of bushes. Ryan pushed aside the branches with his forearm. Nothing. Just disturbed snow. Whatever, or whoever, had been dragged was no longer here. A loud crack echoed behind him, like a branch snapping under weight. Ryan spun around instantly, hand on his holster. The dogs erupted in frantic barking, their bodies straining against the ropes. Their eyes all pointed in the same direction. Not at him, not at the tracks, but at something moving between the trees. Ryan's pulse spiked. He wasn't alone. Someone else was in the forest, and they were watching him. Ryan's heartbeat echoed in his ears as he stared into the dense forest, searching for movement. The silence that followed the snap of the branch was unnerving, too controlled, too deliberate. Whoever was out there wasn't running. They were observing, waiting. Ryan slowly backed toward the tied dogs, keeping his eyes on the trees. Their frantic barking shifted into low, fearful whines, the kind that came from trained animals only when danger was close. The leader dog pressed its head forward, eyes locked on something Ryan couldn't see. "I know," Ryan whispered. "Someone's here." But he still didn't know their motive or intention. He scanned the ground again, forcing himself to stay calm. The fresh snow revealed clues if he looked closely enough. That's when something unusual caught his attention. A slightly raised mound beside a fallen log. It didn't look natural. Snow settled evenly across the forest floor, but this patch was uneven, as if something had been buried beneath it. Ryan approached cautiously, one hand hovering near his holster, and knelt beside the mound. He brushed away the snow layer by layer until his glove struck something solid. Metal. He pushed more snow aside, revealing a rusted grid. His pulse quickened. It was a cage, large, reinforced, and partially sunk into the ground. The bars were bent outward in one corner, as if something had forced its way out. Ryan's breath fogged in front of him as he knelt lower, tugging the cage free from the frozen earth. The door hung open, its lock broken clean off. Inside, scraps of fabric lay scattered, dark blue cloth, some torn, some covered in frost. He reached in and pulled one out. His chest tightened instantly. It was part of a police uniform. A K9 handler's jacket, shredded along the edges, covered in claw marks. Ryan's stomach twisted. Something violent had happened here. But the cage was far too small to hold multiple dogs. It seemed built for isolating one at a time, which meant whoever used it had a system: capture, restrain, separate. He looked closer and saw faint scratches along the base of the metal floor. Not random scratches, patterns. Marks made by paws desperately trying to escape. Ryan swallowed hard, feeling a wave of cold wash over him that had nothing to do with the weather. The 15 dogs didn't just happen to be abandoned in the woods. They were brought here, held here. And one of them had fought violently enough to break free. But the real question was chilling. Where was that dog now? Ryan stared at the shredded K9 jacket in his hands, his pulse thudding beneath the layers of winter gear. The cage, the drag marks, the scattered footprints. Everything pointed to something far more organized than a random act. As he stood, snowflakes settling on his shoulders, a sudden sharp bark erupted behind him. He spun around. The leader dog was pulling violently against the ropes again, its paws digging into the snow with determined force. The others whined and shifted anxiously, but the leader's eyes were locked solely on Ryan. Intense, urgent, pleading. "You want me to follow you," Ryan whispered. The dog barked again, louder this time, then jerked its body forward until the rope cut into its fur. Ryan cursed under his breath. The animal was hurting itself just to get his attention. He hurried over and knelt beside it, examining the knots. Whoever tied these ropes knew exactly how to restrain a trained K9. Tight, layered loops meant to keep them immobilized. But the leader had already loosened part of the rope through sheer persistence. Ryan hesitated for a moment, listening to the forest. No movement, no voices. But that invisible presence still lingered, watching from somewhere unseen. He pulled out his pocket knife and started cutting the rope. The moment the blade sliced through the final knot, the dog lunged forward, not to attack, not to flee, but to stand beside him, pressed against his leg. It made a low sound, almost a huff, then turned sharply and sprinted a few steps into the trees before stopping to look back at him. It wanted him to follow. Ryan took a deep breath. "Lead the way, boy." The dog darted ahead, weaving through the trees with surprising skill despite the cold. Ryan followed closely, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. The footprints from earlier reappeared along the path, but now they overlapped with paw prints, the same shape as the leader's. This was the dog that escaped the cage. This was the one who fought back. Branches snapped as Ryan pushed through them, trying to keep the dog in sight. The deeper they went, the more disturbed the snow became. Something had definitely happened here. Something frantic, violent. The dog slowed suddenly, ears perked, and lowered its head near a cluster of broken branches. Ryan knelt beside it. There, half buried in the snow, was a blood-stained piece of fabric, not from a dog. From a human sleeve. Ryan's stomach dropped. Whoever escaped hadn't escaped alone. Ryan stared at the blood-stained sleeve, his breath turning sharp in the cold air. The leader dog stood perfectly still beside him, its chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes fixed on the narrow trail ahead, as if urging Ryan to keep moving. This wasn't random evidence scattered in the woods. This was a trail, a path deliberately left behind by someone who wanted to be found, or someone who desperately needed help. Ryan rose slowly, tucking the torn fabric into his pocket. Whatever happened here involved more than just the dogs, and whoever shed this blood might still be alive, if he reached them in time. The dog took off again, weaving through the forest with renewed urgency. Ryan followed close behind, stepping carefully over branches and patches of uneven snow. The trees grew thick, forming a long corridor of shadows. The path they traveled wasn't a public trail. It was too narrow, too hidden, carved out by repeated secret use. Ryan's mind raced. Why would trained K9s be brought here? Who controlled them? And why isolate them so deep in the woods? After several minutes of tense silence, the terrain shifted. The trees opened slightly, revealing a small clearing blanketed in untouched snow. Except something broke the perfection. Smoke. A thin wisp curled upward from behind a cluster of pine trees. Ryan instantly lowered his stance. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. The leader dog stopped too, lowering its body to the ground, tail stiff, ears pointed forward. That was not a greeting stance. That was a warning. Ryan circled the clearing cautiously until the source of the smoke came into view. A small wooden cabin, old but sturdy, with a tin roof and covered windows. It looked abandoned at first glance, but the faint glow beneath the door said otherwise. Someone was inside. Someone who didn't want to be found. The footprints leading to the cabin were partially covered by snow, but enough remained to confirm multiple individuals had entered recently. Ryan crouched behind a fallen tree, heart pounding, observing from a distance. No vehicles. No signs of forced entry. This wasn't a hunter's shelter or a stranded traveler's refuge. This place had been used deliberately and quietly. The dog beside him emitted a low growl, its gaze fixed on the door. Ryan touched the dog's shoulder gently. "Is this where they took you?" The dog's response was immediate, a soft whine, followed by a tense, steady stare. Yes. Ryan's jaw tightened. Whatever answers he needed, whatever truth lay behind 15 abandoned police dogs, was waiting inside that cabin, and he was about to walk straight into it. Ryan waited behind the fallen tree, heart thumping in steady, controlled beats. The cabin looked quiet, too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, only the faint crackle of firewood burning somewhere inside. Whoever was in there wasn't expecting company, which gave him one advantage: surprise. The leader dog crouched beside him, body tense, gaze locked on the cabin door. Ryan placed a hand on its fur. "Stay close," he murmured. Then, keeping low, he crept toward the cabin's shadow. The wooden steps complained under his weight as he approached the door. He paused, listening. Nothing. Slowly, he turned the knob. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open, unleashing a waft of warm air mixed with the strange scent of chemicals. Ryan slipped inside, flashlight in hand. The interior was cluttered. Maps pinned to walls, dog leashes hanging from hooks, scattered notebooks, empty food cans. A fire crackled weakly in a small stove, but the room itself felt abandoned in a hurry. Whoever worked here had left quickly. The dog stepped inside beside him, sniffing aggressively. Its ears shot up, and it turned toward the far corner. Ryan followed its gaze. There, half hidden beneath a frayed rug, was a metal hatch. Ryan's pulse quickened. He knelt, peeled back the rug, and exposed a reinforced storage door set into the wooden floor. The latch showed signs of heavy use, fresh scratches, worn paint, and a padlock so recently broken that shards of metal still clung to the edges. Someone forced their way in or out very recently. He lifted the hatch. A cold draft rushed upward. A steep stairway descended into darkness. The dog whimpered, not out of fear, but recognition. Ryan gripped his flashlight tighter and began to descend. Each wooden step creaked softly under his boots. When he reached the bottom, he stopped, stunned. It wasn't a basement. It was an underground facility, small but meticulously built. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A long table held medical syringes, tranquilizer vials, tracking collars, and tagged microchips. A corkboard displayed photographs of German shepherds, several of them matching the dogs he'd found tied above. This wasn't a hideout. It was an operation. Ryan opened one of the filing drawers. Inside were documents labeled transfer, reassignment, decommission. But these weren't official police forms. They were forged copies, each corresponding to a canine dog reported missing over the last 3 years. His stomach turned as understanding hit him. These dogs hadn't been abandoned. They had been stolen, sold, moved, controlled. And the people behind it were still out there. Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the forged documents. Each file carried the name of a canine officer paired with a familiar shepherd's face. Dogs he'd seen in training sessions. Dogs he'd watched compete in police demonstrations. Dogs whose disappearances had been explained with vague excuses, transfer requests, early retirement, medical release, lost during transport. None of it had added up back then. Now the truth stared at him from a dim underground room. These dogs were never transferred. They were taken, strategically, quietly, and systematically, by someone who knew the department from the inside. He pulled out another file. The edges were stiff from cold, the ink slightly smeared. Attached was a photo of a dog named Shadow, a top-tier tracking canine reported last year as having escaped during a storm. Ryan remembered that case clearly. Shadow's handler had blamed himself for leaving a gate unlatched. The guilt had nearly broken him. But here, in Ryan's hands, was the real story. Shadow had been listed as processed and moved to an off-site holding location. That location was likely the very forest above. The leader dog stepped closer and nudged Ryan's leg, as if urging him to keep going. He opened another drawer. More photos, more forged paperwork, more lies. Whoever orchestrated this wasn't a small-time criminal. They had access to departmental records, identification chips, medical history, and training logs. This was someone with rank, clearance, and connections. His flashlight glinted off a stack of manila folders labeled Batch 6, High Value. Inside were printed emails and text exchanges, coded, but not enough to hide intent. Phrases like shipment ready, next group isolated, buyer expects delivery, left no room for doubt. These dogs were being sold, trained police canines, capable of search, rescue, and attack, funneled into the hands of unknown buyers. Ryan felt his stomach twist. Selling trained police dogs wasn't just illegal, it was catastrophic. These animals had skills that could be misused for terrorism, organized crime, hostage situations, or private militias. Whoever bought them could weaponize them instantly. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air crept down his spine. He reached the final file in the drawer. His breath caught. This wasn't a dog. It was a personnel file, belonging to someone he recognized. A senior officer, someone respected, someone trusted, someone with enough authority to access every K-9 deployment and every reassignment order. His chest tightened as he whispered the name under his breath. The betrayal was deeper than he imagined. And now he knew exactly who they were looking for. Ryan stared at the personnel file in his trembling hands, the edges fluttering as a cold draft swept through the underground room. The name printed at the top felt like a punch to the chest. Captain Douglas Warren, A man Ryan had respected for years. A man known for discipline, leadership, and a spotless record. A man who had overseen nearly every K-9 training rotation in the department. Ryan's throat tightened. If Warren was involved, this wasn't just corruption. This was a breach from the very core of their unit. He flipped through the documents inside the folder. Each page hammered deeper into the truth. Supply requisitions signed off by Warren, transfer approvals linked to his login, footage logs showing him as the last person to access K-9 kennels on Knight's dogs went missing, emails written in coded phrases, and at the bottom, photographs of Warren meeting with unknown men near forested drop points. Ryan felt sick. Warren hadn't just looked the other way. He was orchestrating everything. The leader dog nudged Ryan again, sensing his shift in emotion. Ryan exhaled shakily and ran a hand through the dog's fur. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. The dog lowered its head, almost in grief. It had probably served under Warren, trusted him, obeyed him, and been betrayed by him just the same. Ryan rose to his feet, the folder clutched tightly under his arm. He scanned the remaining documents scattered across the table. Every piece fit into a horrifying puzzle. Dogs stolen from the department, funneled into an illegal network, and sold to groups willing to pay top price for highly trained animals. Warren had exploited the dog's loyalty, manipulated handlers' trust, and built a criminal empire under the guise of routine K-9 operations. A faint noise echoed above. Footsteps. Ryan froze. The leader dog's ears shot up and it let out a soft growl. The sound wasn't random. It was steady, cautious, deliberate. Someone was inside the cabin. Ryan extinguished his flashlight instantly, plunging the underground room into darkness. He listened, heartbeat pounding against his ribs. Another footstep. Slow, heavy. Warren, a buyer, or someone coming to destroy evidence? Ryan moved toward the ladder, positioning himself partly below the hatch. The dog stood beside him, muscles tense, ready. The footsteps grew closer, now directly above the hatch. Dust drifted down as the boards creaked under the weight of the person. Ryan's jaw tightened. Whoever was up there wasn't just passing through. They were searching for something, or someone, and they were inches away. The footsteps above grew heavier, each slow thud sending a vibration through the wooden ceiling of the underground room. Ryan stood motionless beneath the hatch, muscles coiled, breath shallow. The leader dog pressed close to his side, its body low, ears pinned back in warning. Whoever was up there wasn't wandering or hiding. They were looking, searching. Ryan tightened his grip on the edge of the ladder, preparing to react the moment the hatch moved. A muffled voice broke the silence. "Check everything. He couldn't have gotten far." Another voice responded, gruff and irritated. "I told you the dogs wouldn't stay tied forever. We should have moved them last night." Ryan's stomach dropped. There were at least 2 men, maybe more, and they already knew something had gone wrong. He heard one of them pacing, boots scraping against the wooden floorboards. Papers rustled, furniture shifted. They were tearing the cabin apart, looking for evidence or looking for him. A loud crash echoed as something heavy toppled over. "Where's the folder?" one man barked. "The one with the next shipment list?" Ryan's pulse spiked. The folder was tucked under his arm, hidden in the shadows below. If they found the open hatch, everything would escalate instantly. The leader dog let out a soft, low growl. Ryan gently touched its shoulder, urging silence. He listened closely as the men continued moving through the cabin. One of them approached the very spot where the rug had been pulled aside. Ryan clenched his teeth. He could hear their breathing now, steady, alert, suspicious. Then came the words Ryan least wanted to hear. "The hatch is open." A moment of stillness. Then, "Someone's down there." The hatch jerked violently, rattling dust loose. A boot stomped on the wooden boards. "Cover the exit," another man shouted. "If he's down there, he's not getting out." Ryan's mind raced. There was no back door, no secondary tunnel. Only the way he came in, and that way was seconds from being blocked. He scanned the dark room desperately for anything he could use. His eyes fell on a set of metal restraints and a tranquilizer gun left on the table. Not much, but enough to buy time. The dog lifted its head, eyes burning with determination. "I know," Ryan whispered. "We have to move now." The hatch began to lift. Light flooded in. A shadow leaned over the opening, gun drawn. Ryan held his breath. Everything was about to explode. The hatch flew open, flooding the underground room with harsh, cold light. Ryan shielded his eyes just as a man leaned over the opening, gun raised, ready to fire. Reflex kicked in. Ryan swung the tranquilizer gun upward and fired a quick shot. The dart struck the man's arm, and he recoiled with a shout, stumbling back from the hatch. "He's armed!" another voice roared. Ryan grabbed the ladder, climbing fast, the leader dog right behind him, paws scraping the rungs with fierce determination. The moment Ryan pushed through the opening, chaos erupted. The first man, weakened but still conscious, lunged at him. Ryan dodged, slamming his shoulder into the attacker's chest. They crashed into a table, scattering papers and metal tools across the floor. The dog burst from the hatch and sank into a defensive stance, teeth bared, growling with a deep, controlled fury. A second attacker charged with a knife. Ryan had no time to reach his holster. Before the blade could strike, the leader dog lunged, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it violently. The knife clattered to the floor as the man screamed, falling to his knees. Another pair of footsteps thundered toward the cabin door. Then something incredible happened. From the forest outside came a chorus of barks, 15 voices, loud, fierce, unified. The other dogs had broken free. Their silhouettes appeared in the doorway, eyes blazing, forming a wall of loyal protectors. For the first time since finding them, Ryan felt the tide shift. The third attacker froze, knife halfway drawn. "Oh, no, no, no," he whispered, backing toward the wall. Ryan seized the moment. "On the ground," he commanded. Before the man could react, the pack surged forward, not to maul him, but to surround him, blocking every escape path. Their growls synchronized, echoing through the cabin like a warning from the earth itself. The attacker dropped his weapon immediately, hands shaking. The man who'd fallen earlier tried to crawl toward the door, but two dogs stepped forward, their stance low, stopping him in his tracks. Ryan quickly cuffed him, then the others, securing each one while the dogs kept them immobilized. Breathing heavily, Ryan stepped back and looked around. 3 criminals, unarmed and restrained. 15 dogs standing guard, their bodies forming a protective circle around him. The leader dog met his gaze with calm, steady eyes. They hadn't just survived. They had fought beside him, and together they had won. Snow crunched loudly under the boots of the officers, rushing into the clearing, drawn by Ryan's emergency beacon the moment the criminals were secured. Patrol lights flashed between the trees, slicing through the winter shadows. Ryan stood at the center of it all, exhausted, bruised, but steady. The leader dog remained at his side, alert as ever, watching every unfamiliar movement with protective focus. As backup teams surrounded the cabin and took custody of the criminals, word spread quickly over the radios. Officers whispered in disbelief, their faces showing shock, anger, and heartbreak all at once. 15 K9s, all stolen? One officer muttered. "Who would do something like this?" another asked. Ryan didn't answer. He simply handed over the thick folder of evidence he had retrieved from the underground room. The commanding officer flipped through the pages, expression darkening with each document. When he reached the personnel file, his breath caught. "Captain Warren," he whispered, voice trembling with disbelief. "Ryan, this can't be real." Ryan shook his head slowly. "I wish it wasn't." The forest seemed to grow quieter as the reality set in. Warren wasn't just a respected figure. He was a mentor, a trusted leader who had shaped the entire K9 unit for years. His betrayal rippled through the officers like a cold wave. Some lowered their heads, others stared blankly at the snow. The thought that someone they admired had orchestrated such a cruel operation shook everyone to the core. A forensic team entered the cabin, documenting the underground facility. Officers retrieved forged documents, tranquilizer vials, and the hidden communication logs. Every recovered item stacked the case higher, leaving no room for doubt. Warren had built a criminal network under their noses, using department resources to mask his crimes. And without Ryan's discovery, it might have continued for years. The rescued dogs were examined one by one. Despite exhaustion and cold exposure, They responded gently to the officers, recognizing familiar scents, wagging their tails weakly, leaning into comforting hands. For many handlers who arrived on scene, seeing their missing partners again was overwhelming. Tears fell freely. Dogs who had been presumed dead or lost forever nuzzled into their handlers' arms, whining softly as though apologizing for disappearing. Ryan watched from a distance, relief washing over him. The leader dog pressed its head against his leg. Ryan knelt and scratched behind its ears. "You brought us here," he whispered. "You saved all of them." But deep inside, he knew something wasn't over. Captain Warren was still missing, and now the entire department knew the truth. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale golden glow over the frost-covered forest. Hours had passed since the operation ended, yet the weight of the night still lingered in the air. The rescued dogs were being carefully transported to a temporary K-9 medical shelter established near the forest entrance. Officers moved gently, wrapping each dog in warm blankets, speaking to them softly. Despite everything they had endured, the shepherds responded with quiet trust, tails wagging, eyes softening at the familiar faces around them. Ryan stood near the line of rescue vehicles, watching as each dog was lifted into safety. Tears blurred the eyes of many handlers who had come to identify their missing partners. Some dropped to their knees, hugging their dogs with shaking hands, unable to speak. Others held their partners' faces and whispered promises they never thought they'd get to say again. The forest, once filled with fear and betrayal, now carried a bittersweet symphony of reunion and relief. Yet in the midst of all this, the leader dog remained by Ryan's side. It refused medical transport, refused to leave his shadow, refused to stand with the others. Whenever an officer approached to lead it away, it simply stepped closer to Ryan, pressing its head gently against his leg. He knelt beside it, running his hand through its thick fur. "You're not tied to anything anymore," he murmured. "You can go home now." But the dog didn't move. Its steady eyes held his, filled with something deeper than gratitude. Loyalty, bond, choice. A senior K-9 veterinarian approached Ryan, clipboard in hand. "This one, he has no registered handler," she said softly. "We checked his chip. He belonged to the unit but was never assigned to anyone permanently. He's completely free for reassignment." She gave Ryan a small smile. "If you're willing." Ryan looked at the dog. The dog looked back. After everything they had survived, everything they had uncovered together, the answer was already written in the dog's unwavering stare. Ryan nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "He's my partner now." A quiet whine escaped the shepherd, followed by a gentle wag of its tail, the first true sign of joy it had shown since being found. As the final vehicles prepared to depart, Ryan took one last look at the forest. The cabin would be torn down, the criminal network dismantled, and the department forever changed. Warren would be hunted, justice would follow. But for now, as Ryan placed a hand on his new partner's back and walked toward the waiting trucks, one truth echoed louder than the cold morning wind. Sometimes the strongest heroes aren't the ones who wear badges, but the ones who wait in the darkness, hoping someone will finally listen.